So I thought it was clouds. So something is burning for sure. Um, Finally, I can feel the heat, the warmth air. Just walking to Starbucks to get a cup of ice for my energy drink. It's Throwback Thursday, folks. It's actually warm.
And then you can get your look at that, go.
Oh, the haunted trail begins September 27th. Cool. Who doesn't love Halloween? Except the Holly Hobby people. You can't get Halloween stuff at the Holly Hobby. I thought it was a fabric store. I really enjoy going to Holly Hobby, but they didn't have any Halloween stuff. And Holly Hobby is not from California. I think they're from somewhere in Carolina. Anyways, how dare they open a Holly Hobby on the West Coast? They have no shame. Somebody was wearing a Paris 2024 t-shirt. Well, the sun is out for sure. It's very warm. I was inside my office where it's air conditioned, and I was actually cold. I had to put on a cashmere sweater. But then I came out and I thought it was cloudy, and it wasn't cloudy. It's smoke from over there. There's a fire. There's a fire here in California, in Southern California. I don't know where you're from. I don't know if you're from California. We haven't had any earthquakes as of late. We're still waiting for the big earthquake, folks. But we do have fires. There's always something going on in the world.
Wait.
I'm just going to Starbucks to get some water. Those windows on that building are shaking. Maybe I spoke too soon about the earthquake as we speak. Buenas tardes a todos desde California. Estoy en vivo. ¿Quién habla español? ¿Quién habla inglés? ¿Quién habla francés? A veces los días son muy aburridos. Sometimes days are just boring. I don't know if today's one of those days. It's just like a boring day. What do you guys think? You can make it fun. I'm just I'm kind of liking this weather, like this the color of the sun is like orange, like it looks very haunting, like Halloween is coming, folks. Let's check out what the Starbucks has in store for us. I think this is the new fall. Maybe this is the new fall line. Check out this bronze color. That's nice. This music is gonna copyright my video. Hello. Can I just get a cup of ice and then a cup of ice water, please? Is that too much to ask? Is that too much to ask? I was just bored and said I'm gonna come out, and then there's a big fire somewhere because there's like a lot of smoke. Yeah, you see? It's like the mountain is on fire.
Oh, yeah. Let's bring on out, no wonder.
Thanks for my fabulous cup of ice.
There you go.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Welcome to Hillcrest, folks. Local sauce. Like I said, it's very boring today. The scene is quite alright. I just see a lot of gray smoke, definitely from the mountains nearby. Like it's like there's a big fire in Tecate. Well, I got my ice from Starbucks. It's ready for an energy drink so I don't fall asleep. I'm typing. I'm launching auctions. I have I have the most auctions I ever had. At one point, I probably did have 1,200 auctions, but I don't know. I took some out. Something went wrong. I think I had like about 1,200 auctions on eBay, but most of them were just like things that were like at $10. What are you gonna do with $10? Writing a book, hippie? Well, I took out the all the auctions that were just like random replicas, and I just decided to, if I had just have something of one of five things, maybe I should just put that I have five things of one instead of putting five different auctions. So, and then minimize the store. And then I went back to having like maybe 1,000 auctions or like 900. And then it was really difficult for me to start posting again high quality items, which I've been doing. And now officially I have over 1,200 auctions, and they're all very unique. And I just started taking pictures of a lot of my psychedelic dresses from the 1960s and some menswear. I feel like now I'm posting serious clothing, not necessarily like designer clothing, because I feel like with the regular clothing that's high end, like high end quality vintage, posting something from like, let's say like a Christian Dior silk scarf, it's the equivalent of posting just like a really good dress from the 70s with tags, or like a pair of Levi's from the 60s, stop pressed, like with a print. I don't have to put high-end quality vintage clothing on my store. I'm from my luxury designer pieces, because I can just concentrate on putting some of my I can just concentrate on putting some of my designer clothing, my regular vintage clothing, and still hold on to the designer clothing, because I have a very good collection of quality vintage from collecting clothing for 30 years, since I was a teen. And remember when I started collecting clothing, the 1970s, just left, and it was the 90s, and I didn't care about the 80s. So I started collecting clothing from the 70s and the 60s, because at the time when I started collecting vintage clothing, those 2 decades was the only thing that you could buy at the thrift store, because that's the kind of clothing that people were getting rid of. Nobody was getting rid of the 80s, because the 80s just happened. No one was going to get rid of their t-shirts and their punk shirts and their clothing of the time. So I started collecting clothing in the 90s, designer clothing, because it was good, it was easy to get. And so I remember going and collecting, like I used to buy a lot of Levi's in the 90s that was from the 50s. In the 60s I used to get a lot of stuff like that. I actually started piling it up flat on the floor, everything Levi's. A lot of things were just biggie Levi's, and then it became like 6 foot high. Anyways, I just found a pile of Levi shirts, biggies from the 1950s, and I'm gonna start taking pictures of that. Also started another pile of designer scarves because in my 30 years of buying vintage clothing, every time I would go out and I would buy things, I would see like silk scarves. And because the people, they don't know or they don't care, they just go, oh, you can have it, or they would say like 10 scarves for $1. Like, so I would just buy the scarves and I started laying them flat, and then one box holds up to 500 scarves. And some of the scarves, I just decided to start selling it. One of the scarves from those 500 was like Hermes scarves, signed from the 80s or the 70s. A lot of Hermes scarves, actually. A lot of them were from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. Because remember, Hermes, not like Gucci, who started actually... Gucci never made clothing. Gucci only made accessories until like 1971 was the year that Gucci started making clothing and selling clothing. But prior to 1971, Gucci did not make any clothing. They only made accessories. It wasn't a fashion thing. It was just accessories. I know a lot about the history of the world of fashion because I went to the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising in Los Angeles in 1988, in 1989, in 1990. Well, can you imagine when I went to the Fashion Institute and I had a class in 1989 that it's called the Fashion History. The history of fashion. It was so hard to find books on fashion, and it was really hard to find information on designers that I loved at the time. I was so enamored with Jean Patou, Lanvin, Chloe, Madame Grès. I was in love with those designers in like 89, 1990, in the first years of the 90s, because remember, at that time, they were alive in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. Well, before 1939, before the beginning of World War II. So only for 20 years, those designers, they shaped the world. They were the first designers of fashion. Remember that the 1900s, they had Charles Worth. He is the first designer to put a name on clothing. But then when he died, his son took over the house of Worth. And then in the 1910s and 20s and 30s, you had Schiaparelli, Vionnet, Chanel, and they were the new crowd of fashion designers. Well, imagine that in the 80s, they were my inspiration to be a fashion designer, because fashion designer, I went to school for it. And in 1989, in my class, the history of fashion, I was thrilled, I was excited. And in those years, actually before I even went to school in the late 80s, 1987, 88, I used to go to the thrift stores with my mom in the 80s, and I remember that everything was 25 cents. The thrift stores were not like today, because even in the late 80s, the range of buying and wearing vintage was still not big. It was until the 90s that it started getting big, and people started wearing 1940s and 50s clothing. In the 90s, it was all about the 40s and the 50s. And in the 80s, it was all about the 60s. Because people were wearing mod and the new rules and the new romantics and the punks. Well, everything that you could get sort of people would just probably just wear 1960s clothing because mods were in fashion. And then when I took that class of fashion designing, I learned a lot about fashion. Well, in those 2 years, I really knew a lot of the clothing designers that that shaped the world of fashion in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, which was only 10 years before 1989. If you think about it, 1979. All the clothing from the 70s we used to make fun of because I thought it was sort of ridiculous, and I hated platform shoes, and I hated everything rainbow. I thought it was really nasty. Anyway, so let's go. Goodbye.